The basement door swung open, and a foul smell rushed into my nose. My wife, the poor Alzheimer's patient, was lying curled up on the cold concrete floor, gasping for breath after 14 days of starvation. I shakily dialed my daughter's number. On the other end of the line, her voice was cold and cruel. "Dad, you're home so soon? Mom hasn't gone yet? Don't try to save her anymore. She's senile. Living any longer will only cost money for medicine. Consider her the last sacrifice so we can have capital to do business." She hung up, laughing at her biological mother's agony. She thought she had won by taking everything away from us. But at that moment, I was no longer her father. I was her death sentence. I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening? The red-eye flight from Vancouver landed at 6 p.m., but it took me another 2 hours of traffic to get to the driveway of my suburban home. I am Thomas, a 65-year-old retired civil engineer, and I had just spent 14 long days at my mother's bedside after a stroke. My body was exhausted, my joints aching from age and fatigue, but my heart was on fire. I had never been away from my wife, Margaret, for so long since she was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. For the past 2 weeks, guilt had gnawed at me every night in a foreign land. But our daughter Jenny had promised firmly before I left. "Dad, don't worry about Grandma. I'll take good care of Mom at home. I'll move back in with Mom until you get back." I believed her. Why not believe my own daughter? 8 p.m. By now, a warm yellow light should have been shining from the living room window. Margaret hated the dark, a new fear that had come with the disease. She always needed a bright light, a presence to hold on to the slipping reality. But the house before me, it was dark. A cold, silent black mass set amidst the neatly trimmed lawns of this quiet neighborhood. No lights, no television humming. Silence enveloped it, a silence that was not peaceful, but deadly. I inserted the key into the lock, my hand trembling slightly from the cold September night, or perhaps from the ominous premonition creeping into my gut. The door opened. I paused. The familiar scent of vanilla candles and cleaning detergent that Margaret had maintained for the past 40 years was gone. In its place, a different smell assaulted my nostrils. The smell of stagnation, mold, the sour, musty smell of rotten food, and something pungent, like a long-abandoned public restroom. "Margaret, I'm home? Jenny, are you home?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty house. There was no answer. Only the slow, heavy ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the dining room. I dragged my old Samsonite suitcase, my steadfast companion for 3 decades of work, inside. The sharp, screeching sound of the wheels on the oak wood floor pierced the eerie silence. I reached for the light switch in the hallway. Click, click. Nothing happened. Power outage? That couldn't be it. The streetlights outside were still on. My heart began to beat faster, a frantic rhythm of panic waiting to explode. I left the suitcase in the hallway and groped my way through the darkness toward the living room. And then I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't a mouse running across the ceiling. It wasn't the wind pounding against the window. It was a rhythmic, faint, desperate sound. It came from beneath my feet, from behind the door that led to the basement, a place we rarely used. I stood rooted to the spot, holding my breath as I listened. The pounding came again, this time accompanied by a different sound, like the hoarse, guttural moan of a wounded animal. My intuition told me that the peaceful old age I had dreamed of had officially ended at this very moment. I rushed to the wooden door leading down to the basement, my heart pounding in my chest as if it would burst. Normally, this door was just ajar or lightly latched to keep the cat out. But today it was different. A chilling difference. Between me and my moaning wife below was a large, cold, heavy master lock, the kind you would use on a warehouse or an iron gate, not an interior door. Who would do this? Who would lock a frail woman, who sometimes couldn't even remember her own name, into that cold darkness? "Margaret, are you down there? Margaret!" I screamed, pounding on the door. The moaning from below was silent for a second, then turned into panicked sobs. Anger and fear hit me all at once, transforming me from a tired 65-year-old man into a madman. I rushed out to the garage. my hands shaking as I rummaged through the clutter of tools that I usually kept organized. There it was, the steel crowbar I'd used to pry up the old floorboards last year. I turned around and jammed the end of the crowbar into the crack in the door. The old oak creaked in protest at the intrusion. I didn't care. I mustered all the strength I had left, gritting my teeth until my jaw ached. Crack. The wood around the latch broke. The door swung open, slamming against the wall. Immediately, a pungent stench wafted up from the darkness below, forcing me to take a step back, my stomach churning. It was the smell of neglect, of uncollected human waste, of sickness and despair. I fumbled for the stairwell light switch. The 40 watts bulb's weak yellow light cast a shadow on the cold concrete floor. And there, at the foot of the stairs, was a sight that would haunt me to my grave. Margaret, my beautiful and proud wife, lay curled on a thin, dirty mattress. She was emaciated, her cheeks sunken, her lips cracked and bleeding. The silk nightgown she had loved was tattered and stained with unspeakable stains. Oh God, Margaret! I rushed down, kneeling beside her. But when I reached out to touch her shoulder, she cowered, raising her hands to cover her face like a child afraid of being beaten. Her eyes were wide, cloudy with fear and dehydration, looking at me but without any trace of recognition. "Don't, please. I'll be good," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. My heart felt like it was being crushed with a vice. She thought I was the one who had locked her up. She thought I had come back to punish her. "No, no, it's me, Thomas. I'm back. I won't let anyone hurt you again." I choked, trying to keep my voice soft, despite the screaming inside. Perhaps recognizing the familiar voice, or maybe just exhausted to the point of not being able to fight anymore, she lowered her hand. I gently lifted her head, feeling the dry, feverish skin. In her delirium, Margaret's dry lips moved. I leaned closer, trying to hear the faint whispers escaping her throat. "Jenny," she said. She needed money. The whole world around me seemed to collapse. That name, uttered in this terrible situation, hurt more than 1,000 knives, stabbing my heart. The red and blue lights of the ambulance swept back and forth on the garage wall, creating a surreal scene as dizzy as my mind at that moment. I sat huddled in a corner of the back of the ambulance, my old hand tightly clasping Margaret's cold, skinny hand like a dry branch. The medical staff worked urgently, attaching oxygen tubes, giving IV fluids, but my eyes were fixed on my wife's haggard face. In the sound of sirens tearing apart the quiet night of the suburbs, a memory suddenly rushed back, painfully suffocating. I remembered the day I taught Jenny to ride a bicycle. She fell, scraped her knees, and cried out for her father. I was the one who picked her up, wiped her tears, and put a princess-shaped bandage on her. That little girl who used to cling to me for fear of falling. How could she turn into a heartless monster who locked her own mother in the basement like an animal? Street Jude greeted us with the sterile coldness of the emergency room. I was left in the hallway, sitting on a hard plastic chair, staring at the closed gray double doors. An hour later, the doctor emerged, his expression more serious than I feared. "Mr. Holloway," he said, his voice low and professional, but his eyes were suspicious. "Your wife is severely dehydrated, severely malnourished, and showing signs of hypothermia. Based on the condition of her bed sores, I fear she has been left in that condition for at least 10 days. 10 days. 10 days of hell in our own home." Fear took over, hot, and replaced the fear. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking, and dialed Jenny. Once, twice, 3 times. Only the cold sound of voicemail. It was gone. On a hunch, I shakily opened the banking app on my phone. I rarely checked it because I trusted my daughter to manage my finances while I was away. The screen loaded, and my heart stopped. Retirement savings, $0. Checking account, $12.45. Empty. It was drained. My entire life's work, the money I'd saved for Margaret's medical bills, all gone with my fake filial daughter. At that moment, 2 police officers walked in. I stood up, a glimmer of hope. Justice had finally come. I wanted to yell at them to arrest Jenny immediately. But the older officer held up his hand to calm me down, his eyes lacking the sympathy I'd expected. "Mr. Thomas Holloway? The hospital has reported a case of suspected elder abuse," he said, his voice flat as if reading a report. "It's my daughter. She locked my wife up. She took all our money and ran away." I choked, trying to explain. The police officer looked at me, then at the medical records in his hand. He asked a question that made my blood freeze. "Are you sure your wife didn't lock herself down there? We know she has Alzheimer's and often gets lost. Mr. Thomas, we need more evidence than just a one-sided confession before we can issue a warrant for your daughter. Right now, the only person present at the scene is you." I stood frozen in the middle of the hospital corridor filled with the smell of disinfectant. The door of justice not only didn't open, but it just slammed shut right in front of me. Leaving the hospital with the police in my mind, I headed back to my house. I needed to get some clean clothes for Margaret, her favorite sweater, because the hospital was always cold. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I realized this was no longer my home. It was the scene of a crime, the murderer being my own son. The house was ransacked. Not the mess of a hasty burglary, but a cold, calculated ransacking. Drawers of dressers were pulled out, papers strewn across the hardwood floor. I rushed into the study where I kept my SentrySafe fireproof safe. The door was wide open, empty. All the government bonds I had accumulated over 30 years of engineering, the title to this house, and the $5,000 emergency cash I kept in case Margaret needed to be hospitalized. All gone. Nausea rising in my throat, I staggered out to the kitchen. On the refrigerator door, where we usually had happy family photos and the kids' doodles, there was now only a yellow note. Jenny's handwriting, round and neat, the kind I was so proud of when I taught her to write. "You never understand how hard it is for us. Kyle needs capital to rebuild his life. Consider this your early inheritance. Don't look for us again." Early inheritance? Did he call stealing his mother's pension and leaving her to rot in the basement early inheritance? I crumpled the paper in my hands, wanting to scream, but my throat was tight. But that wasn't the worst part. On the kitchen counter, placed neatly like a challenge, was a file. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a copy of a durable power of attorney. At the bottom of the page, I saw Margaret's signature. It wasn't her old, soft handwriting, but a shaky, broken scrawl. He'd clearly forced her to sign this document while she was in a daze, giving him complete legal control of our assets. "Oh my God, Thomas, what's going on?" I turned, startled. My neighbor, Mrs. Miller, was standing at the back door holding a tray of hot casseroles. She looked at me, then at the ruined house. "Jenny, she told me you were stuck at the airport, so she had to put Margaret in a nursing home." Mrs. Miller stammered, her old face pale with shock. "She asked me to watch the house for a few days. I thought..." He'd lied to everyone. He'd built the perfect scenario while I was thousands of miles away. The phone in my pocket buzzed. A new email. The sender was a law firm I had never heard of. "Dear Mr. Holloway, our client, Miss Jennifer Holloway, has filed a petition for emergency guardianship of her parents. Reason: parents are elderly, unable to manage their own property, and have shown signs of mutual abuse." I dropped the phone on the floor. They weren't just stealing my money. They were trying to steal my last shred of dignity, turning me from a victim into a criminal. This fight wasn't about money anymore. It was about the truth. I walked into the local police station with the crumpled power of attorney in my hand, full of hope. Sheriff Miller was my old fishing buddy, a man of integrity I had always trusted. He would understand, he would help me. But when I placed the paper on his desk, Miller's expression was not the anger I expected, but pity. He pushed up his glasses, sighed. "Thomas, I understand you're angry, but legally, this looks perfectly legal. It has Margaret's signature. It's not a notary's stamp." But it's a fake." Margaret was in no state of mind to sign anything. She forced her. I slammed my hand on the desk, my voice cracking with despair. Miller looked at me, his eyes pitying but helpless. "I believe you, Thomas, but the court needs proof. If she signed the power of attorney, then technically it's not theft for her to withdraw the money. We need to prove she was coerced or deceived at the time of signing. Given her current medical condition, that's next to impossible." I left the police station feeling like I'd been doused with cold water. My lifelong commitment to honesty was now a joke. The law, which I'd always believed in, was protecting the perpetrator simply because it knew how to slip through the cracks. My last hope was the bank. I drove to the First National branch where I'd kept my money for the past 40 years. The branch manager, a young woman with an industrial smile, coldly announced, "Mr. Holloway, we're sorry about your situation, but the transaction was made by a legal power of attorney. We can't interfere without a court order." The second door slammed shut in front of me. I stood in the middle of the luxurious bank lobby, feeling smaller and more helpless than ever. At that moment, my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. I opened it and froze. It was a photo. Jenny and Kyle were lounging on sun loungers by the pool of some luxury resort, brightly colored cocktails in hand. They were smiling, the triumphant smiles of people who had just pulled off a perfect robbery. Beneath the photo was a short text message. "Don't try to find us. It's useless. You'll only make things worse for Mom if you keep trying. Enjoy your old age." The anger inside me no longer burned fiercely. It cooled, hardened into a sharp block of steel. I looked at the phone screen, at the smile of the daughter I had loved more than life itself. I realized I was alone in this fight. No police, no bank, no one to help me. Not only did I have to care for a wife who was panicking from her horrible memories, but I also had to fight an enemy who knew me best, knew my every weakness. I put my phone back in my pocket. It was time to change my approach. I could no longer be a grieving father looking for justice. I had to. The house had become a cold maze filled with my daughter's dark secrets. The silence was no longer empty. It was thick like a suffocating fog, hiding the truths I was forced to expose. With the determination of a hunter, I began to turn every corner of Jenny's old bedroom upside down. Under the bed, covered in dust, was an old cardboard box. Inside were not childhood mementos, but scribbled notebooks and a diary. I opened it, and each line was like a needle stabbing into my heart. Day 1, Mom ate chicken soup, slept very well. Called Dad, said everything was fine. Day 5, Mom is a little tired, but still recognizes herself. Has given her medicine. Day 10, Mom is happily watching TV. Dad, please take care of Grandma. He wrote these lines. While Margaret lay huddled in the cold basement, hungry and scared, he had planned this lie meticulously, coldly to the point of cruelty. He had not only abandoned us, he had played the perfect act, smiling and calling me Daddy over the phone, while his other hand was locking that hellish door. Beneath the diary was an old flip phone, the kind of disposable burner phone. It had long since run out of battery. I found an old charger in a drawer and plugged it in. When the screen lit up, it asked for a password. I tried his birthday. Wrong. Our wedding anniversary. Wrong. In a moment of ironic thought, I entered Margaret's birthday. The phone unlocked. The painful irony made me laugh bitterly. He was using the birthday of the mother he was harming to protect his dark secrets. My inbox was filled with messages from unknown anonymous numbers. Pay me back now, bitch. You can't hide forever. Kyle said, you'll get the money. I'll give you 48 hours. After that, don't blame me. The interest is compounding. The $50,000 is just interest. Pay back the principal quickly. I scrolled through the messages, each line revealing a horrifying truth. Jenny and Kyle weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Kyle had blown all his money on a failed cryptocurrency investment and was now being hunted by black credit gangsters. They didn't need my money to live comfortably, but to stay alive. Suddenly, the phone in my hand rang. An unknown number. I hesitated for a second and then pressed the answer button. Hello? There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then a hoarse, cold male voice said, I don't know who you are with this phone, but tell Jenny to pay. Or, he paused, his snort dry, or that nice house in the suburbs will be the brightest tonight. I know you're home alone, old man. The call ended. I stood frozen in my daughter's old room, the phone hot in my hand. The risk was no longer just losing money. It had escalated to a life-threatening situation. I drove my old Ford F-150, the one I'd kept as a memento for 20 years, into the Beverly Hills section of the city, a place where multi-million-dollar mansions hid behind towering iron gates and meticulously manicured hedges. My in-laws, Kyle's parents, lived here. They were upper-class people, always appearing elegant and speaking sweetly at family gatherings. I had trusted them, thinking they loved their children as much as I did, and that they would not accept their son's cruelty. But I was wrong, horribly wrong. The iron gates opened after I announced my name over the intercom. I parked my old truck next to their shiny Mercedes S-Class, feeling the class difference from the first moment. Kyle's mother, Mrs. Harrison, greeted me in the large living room, with its high ceilings and marble fireplace. She didn't invite me to sit. Her gaze was cold, devoid of her usual pretense. "What are you doing here, Thomas? I thought we had nothing more to talk about after what you did to the children." "What did I do?" I was stunned, anger beginning to boil. "Your son and my daughter locked my wife in the basement. They almost killed her. They stole our pension." Mrs. Harrison sneered, a contemptuous smile. She sipped tea from her expensive bone china cup. "Oh, come on, Thomas. Stop playing the victim. If you'd been a little more generous, if you hadn't kept all that money while the children were struggling, they wouldn't have done so much. Do you have the money to let your children starve? Kyle is just trying to build a career, and you, as his father-in-law, should be supporting him, not pushing him into a corner." I couldn't believe my ears. This brazenness, this reversal of black and white. It was beyond my imagination. "What are you talking about? They owe the mafia. They lost money playing virtual currency. That's not a career, that's gambling." "Enough." Mr. Harrison stepped in, his voice booming with authority. "Get out of my house. If you dare come here to bother us or threaten my children again, I'll call the police. And believe me, my lawyer is worth more than your scabby truck." I was chased out of that magnificent mansion like a mangy dog. The humiliation clung to me, stickier and smellier than dirt. I realized the corruption didn't just start with Kyle. It was hereditary. I was truly alone in this fight. But the cruelest blow was still waiting for me at home. When I drove back to the driveway, a glaring orange piece of paper was stuck right on the front door. It was a warrant. Temporary restraining order. Petitioner: Jennifer Holloway. Respondent: Thomas Holloway. Reason: domestic violence, death threat. She struck first. The daughter I once loved used the law as a weapon against me, turning me from a father seeking justice into a potential criminal right outside my own door. The restraining order in my hand was like a death sentence for the man I had once been. Thomas Holloway, the diligent engineer, the devoted father, the loving husband, all died the moment I read those incriminating words. The law, which I had worshipped all my life, was now aimed at me, protecting the man who had driven my wife to her death. I drove to Sunny Meadows Nursing Home, where I had temporarily placed Margaret because I could not care for her alone in this chaotic situation. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and the loneliness of old age. When I entered the room, Margaret was sitting in a wheelchair, staring out the window with lifeless eyes. "Margaret, it's me." As soon as she heard my voice, she jumped. Her eyes were wide open, full of fear. She started screaming, waving her hands wildly as if she were chasing away a monster. "No, don't come near me. Don't lock me up anymore. Please." The nurses had to rush in to hold her back. A young nurse looked at me with concern. "Sorry, Mr. Holloway, maybe. You should go out. She's very nervous around men." The memory of the basement. It's still too strong. I stood frozen outside the glass door, watching the wife I loved more than life itself, cowering in fear of herself. This pain was more cruel than death. They didn't just steal my money. They stole my wife while she was still alive. I drove home in a terrifying silence. No more tears, no more impulsive anger. Just a cold, sharp as a scalpel. When I got home, I went straight to the living room. I took down all the family photos with Jenny in them. Her college graduation photo, my wedding photo, our family vacation to Disney World. All neatly packed into a cardboard box, taped shut, and pushed deep into the darkest corner of the warehouse. I was burying my daughter. Then I called a used car dealership. An hour later, they came and towed my 1,998 Ford F-150. The old truck, my faithful companion during my construction years, filled with memories of fishing trips with my dad. I sold it for a pittance, just to get $5,000 in cash. I needed black money for a black war. With the wad of cash in hand, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in over 10 years. "Mike? It's Thomas. I know you're retired, but I have a problem. A problem that lawyers can't solve. I need someone who knows how to play dirty." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then a hoarse, cigarette-smelling laugh rang out. "I've been waiting for this call for a long time, old man. Tell me, who pissed off the hibernating bear?" Mike, the aging private investigator with a face as worn as an old map, sat across from me in the rundown suburban diner. He took a drag from his cigarette, puffed out a cloud of smoke, then tossed a faded photograph onto the greasy table. "This is the notary who signed your wife's power of attorney," Mike said hoarsely. "His name is Carl. He's a drunk and a gambler. Guess who he drinks with? Your precious son-in-law, Kyle." My heart pounded. There it was, the first clue. Excitement raced down my spine. We'd found the weakest link in their perfect plan. "We have to find him," I said, standing up. "Calm down, old man." Mike held up a hand to stop me. "I went to his office this morning. It was closed. Neighbors say he moved out that night, after receiving a large sum of cash. Kyle has outdone us." The excitement faded, replaced by a feeling of disappointment. But the real punch was yet to come. When I got home, an urgent envelope from First National Bank was in the mailbox. I ripped it open on the doorstep. Urgent mortgage notice. My house. The house I paid off 10 years ago. The home that held 40 years of family memories was being foreclosed on by the bank. It turned out that before Jenny fled, she had used that fake power of attorney to take out a $200,000 mortgage, and of course it paid no interest. I stood there, frozen in my hand, the paper shaking. He used my house to borrow money, used my money to hire the best lawyer in town to fight me. Every dollar he used to shut me up, to take everything from me, was the sweat and tears I had saved all my life. This irony was bitter, choking my throat. At that moment, a white government car stopped in front of the house. 2 women got out, their shirts bearing the APS, Adult Protective Services badge. "Mr. Thomas Holloway?" the older woman asked, her voice cold and full of suspicion. "We have an urgent report. Your daughter Jennifer has accused you of illegal confinement and abuse of your wife, Margaret. She claims that you locked her in the basement because you couldn't bear to take care of her, and she tried to rescue her mother, but you threatened her." I looked at them, speechless. He didn't just rob money, he robbed the house. It wants to steal my last bit of honor, turning me into the devil in my own story. The APS investigation was mental torture. I had to sit for hours facing young social workers who looked at me through thick glasses with judgmental eyes. They asked me about the bruises on Margaret's hands, the sores my daughter had caused, but now I was the one who had to explain. Every answer I gave was recorded, dissected, doubted. I felt like I was being stripped naked, stripped of all dignity as a husband and father. "Mr. Holloway, why didn't you hire a nurse to take care of your wife while you were away? Why didn't you install a surveillance camera in the house? Do you have a history of anger?" The questions were like knives cutting into a bleeding wound. I wanted to scream that my daughter was the culprit, but I knew, in their eyes at this moment, I was just a suspicious old man trying to blame his children. And then, in the midst of my despair, a glimmer of hope appeared from the most unexpected place. A Facebook message from a stranger named Chloe. "Mr. Holloway, I know you didn't do it. I know who did. Kyle." Chloe was Kyle's former secretary, a young woman with wide, innocent eyes who had been fooled by his fake, glamorous facade. She had lost not only her savings, but also her faith in humanity. Kyle had used her, made promises, and then mercilessly dumped her when she had outlived her usefulness. "I have all the emails and texts," Chloe wrote, each line dripping with hatred. "They had been planning this for 6 months. Kyle called your wife a troublesome old woman, and Jenny. Your daughter agreed with everything he said. I have proof they were talking about locking her up to solve the problem quickly." My heart was pounding. There it was, a last lifeline in a stormy sea. The enemy of my enemy could be a friend, or it could be another trap. But what choice did I have? I was on the edge of a cliff, and I had to grab anything that would help me climb, however fragile. "Meet me," I texted back, my fingers shaking on the keyboard. "Anywhere, anytime." We arranged to meet at the Rusty Spoon, a rundown diner outside of town where long-haul truckers stopped for a quick dinner. It was the perfect place for secret meetings, where no one cared about anyone else. I sat in a secluded corner, ordered a bitter black coffee, and stared out at the deserted parking lot. This could be my last chance to turn things around, to clear my name and get justice for Margaret. Or it could be the end of it all. I clutched my steaming cup of coffee, waiting for a stranger to hold my destiny in his hands. The Rusty Spoon diner was deserted, save for the hum of the old refrigerator and the smell of burnt grease. I was on my fifth cup of coffee, my eyes glued to the clock on the wall. 2 hours had passed since the appointed time. Chloe hadn't shown up. I called her for the 10th time, but only received a long, hopeless ring. A cold unease began to creep into my bones. Something was wrong, very wrong. Suddenly, the door to the diner swung open. The flashing red and blue lights from outside shone directly into my eyes, blinding me. 2 police officers entered, their guns still in their holsters but their hands on the grips. They walked straight toward me. "Thomas Holloway?" the tall officer asked, his voice hard. "Would you please follow us to the station? We have a report that you are harassing and threatening a woman named Chloe." I was stunned. "Clue? Threatening? I've never met her." At the police station, the truth came out like a punch to the face. Kyle had been one step ahead of me. Not only had he found Chloe before me, but he had also used money he had stolen from me to silence her. Or worse, he had threatened her. Either way, Chloe had switched sides. She told the police that I was a crazy, paranoid old man who kept calling and threatening to harm her if she didn't lie to me and help me against my daughter. I was held in a cold interrogation room for 4 hours. Although they eventually released me for lack of evidence, the damage had been done. My reputation, the only thing I had left to fight with APS in the courts, was now in tatters. In the eyes of the law, I was no longer a father seeking justice. I had become a harasser, a potential danger. I walked out of the police station in the middle of the night. The wind was cold, but not as cold as the loneliness that enveloped me. The parking lot was deserted. Only the yellow streetlights cast a long shadow on the cracked asphalt. My phone vibrated. A text message from Jenny. "Dad, stop. You see? You can't win. Stop before you lose the house and go to jail. We only want what's best for you. You're old. Rest." The psychological manipulation reached its peak. It stabbed me fatally, while whispering in my ear that it was for my own good. I stood there alone in the dark, completely isolated, realizing how naive I had been. I was playing a life-or-death game with the demons in human form, and they were always 3 moves ahead. But I still had one last piece, a pawn they had left on the board, and I would use it to checkmate. Mike returned on a rainy night, soaked but with a menacing light in his eyes. He said nothing, just tossed a thick file onto the kitchen table. It was heavy, like it contained a ton of tragedy. "You think your son-in-law is just some loser addicted to crypto?" Mike hissed, his voice hoarse from cigarettes and disgust. "You're wrong, Thomas. He's a professional predator." I flipped through the files, and my world collapsed a second time. Kyle, his real name wasn't Kyle. He'd changed his name twice. In Florida, he was Kenneth Young. In Arizona, he was Kevin Yoder. Everywhere he went, he left a trail of victims, lonely, elderly people he'd plundered, and disappeared without a trace. But it was the last page that made my blood run cold. An old, faded article from a local newspaper in Ohio. A 70-year-old widow died after falling down the stairs. The victim was his biological mother. She died just 2 days after transferring full ownership of the house to her filial son, who had just returned after many years away. The police ruled it an accident. But I knew, and Mike knew, it wasn't an accident. "They don't just want money, Thomas," I whispered, my throat tight. "They want us dead. Margaret was lucky to survive 10 days in that basement, but that luck won't last forever. If I don't stop them, they'll kill her to cover up the evidence. And me too." I shuddered at the thought of Jenny, my little girl. She wasn't just greedy. She was completely brainwashed by that monster. She saw what he did, and instead of running away, she chose to be an accomplice. She willingly signed her own parents' death warrant. At that moment, an urgent email from the bank popped up on my phone. The final message. "The house will be auctioned in 48 hours. 48 hours. That was all I had left before I lost my last bastion. I had no time to investigate, no time to play by the rules. The beast had cornered me, and now it bared its fangs for the final bite. The emergency hearing took place in a small, stuffy courtroom that smelled of old wood varnish and cold bureaucracy. I stood at the podium, clutching the file about Kyle's dark past, my heart pounding like a drum. This was my last chance to save the house, to save Margaret's life. "Your Honor," I began, my voice shaking with emotion but trying to sound firm. "I have evidence that my son-in-law, Kyle, is a professional con artist. He has changed his name several times and has a history of stealing from the elderly. He and my daughter are deliberately pushing us into a corner to steal our assets." The judge, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, glanced at the file I held up. But before he could say anything, Jenny's lawyer, a man in a shiny Armani suit, with a smile as sharp as a scalpel, rose to object. "Your Honor, I beg to dismiss these unfounded charges. Mr. Holloway is mentally unstable. Just 2 days ago, he was taken into police custody for harassment and witness intimidation. Here are the police records." He placed another file on the judge's desk. It was the Chloe incident report. The nightmare had come to a head. The trap they had set at the diner was now collapsing, crushing all my hopes. "I object! That's slander!" I shouted, but the judge's gavel rang out, cutting me off. "Order! Mr. Holloway, this evidence is disturbing. The court cannot rely on the testimony of someone under investigation for harassment to order a stay of a lawful mortgage." I looked at Jenny in the back seat. She had her head down, her shoulders shaking as if she were crying, but I knew it was an act. She was laughing. She had won. Justice had died in this room, suffocated by lies wrapped in expensive suits. "The court denies Mr. Thomas Holloway's motion," the judge announced, his voice cold as ice. "The House will proceed to auction in accordance with due process. In addition, in view of Mr. Holloway's unstable mental state, the court has granted temporary medical supervision of Margaret to Miss Jennifer Holloway until further notice." I stood there dumbfounded. I had not only lost my home, but also my right to protect my wife. I had been stripped of everything, right in the eyes of the law. An hour later, I was escorted from my own home by the police. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the door of my beloved home slam shut in front of me, realizing that I had just become homeless in my own life. I was allowed back into the house one last time, just 15 minutes to collect what was left of my life. 2 police officers stood at the door, their eyes no longer on me with respect, but with the look of a loser. But the worst thing wasn't the presence of the police. It was Jenny. She was leaning against the fireplace, where we used to hang our Christmas stockings every year. She was wearing a brand new designer dress, her face carefully made up, watching me stuff a few old clothes into a battered suitcase. "Don't make things difficult for everyone," she said, her voice cold and dry. "You're old. Just face it. The government's cheap nursing home isn't so bad. You'll have friends there." I looked up at her. The little girl who used to sit on my lap and listen to fairy tales was now standing before me, talking about sending me to a cheap nursing home, as if she were discussing throwing away an old thing. "Why?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why did you do this to Mom and Dad?" She walked closer to me, taking advantage of the 2 policemen talking privately outside the door. She leaned close to my ear, whispering words that made my blood freeze. "Mommy won't live long if you keep resisting. Her medicine is expensive, you know. If you behave, I might consider buying her enough medicine." I looked at her, stunned. She was no longer my daughter. In front of me was a demon, in human form. I said nothing, just quietly zipped up the suitcase. I walked out of the house I had built with my own hands, brick by brick. It started to rain, cold raindrops hitting my face, mixing with helpless tears. Just then my phone rang. It was the hospital. "Mr. Holloway? Your wife. Margaret has just had a major seizure. We've discovered that the medical records she's been sent over are missing information about the anti-seizure medication she needs to take daily. She's in critical condition. You need to come here immediately." The phone slipped from my hand and landed in a puddle of rainwater. Jenny, she had done it. She had begun to carry out her threat. The darkest night of my life had just descended upon me, pitch black and hopeless. I rushed to the hospital in the pouring rain, my heart aching with pain. Margaret lay there on the white hospital bed, so small and frail that I feared she would disappear if I touched her lightly. The steady, lifeless hum of the ventilator was the only sound that kept me grounded to this cruel reality. She was gasping for breath, fighting for every breath because of the cruelty of her own child. My phone rang. Kyle. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking with anger and helplessness. How's it going, old man? Is your wife still breathing? His voice was smooth and triumphant. Listen, I have a proposal. Sign the papers to give up all rights to the house and drop the lawsuit. I'll transfer $50,000 to the hospital account right away, so they can get the best medicine for her. If not, then prepare for her funeral. I looked at my wife, at the tubes and tubes that crisscrossed her body. I had lost. They had won. I had nothing left to lose, except her. Okay, I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. Bring the papers here. An hour later, their lawyer appeared, placing a cold file on the bedside table. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking. I was about to sign my name on the death warrant for my life, in exchange for a glimmer of hope for Margaret. But just as the pen was about to touch the paper, the door to the hospital room burst open. Mike rushed in, drenched in rain, panting. "Don't sign! Thomas, don't sign!" he shouted, rushing forward to snatch the file from my hands. "Mike, I have no choice. Margaret." "We have it!" Mike held up a small black object, a portable hard drive. "Proof of God, Thomas. Not from the outside. From within their arrogance." I looked at Mike, not understanding. But in the tired old eyes of my old friend, I saw a flame burning. The flame of hope. The flame of justice about to be served. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? God didn't send angels to save us. He sent Mike, with a hard drive covered in dust. Remember that old ADT security system you thought was broken 5 years ago? Mike said, his voice hoarse with excitement. Kyle secretly fixed it. He wanted to track you, to know when you were away so he could act. But his arrogance killed him. He forgot that the system automatically backed up to the cloud. The camera they thought was dead recorded it all. The police, the FBI this time, because it had escalated to federal fraud, swooped down on the luxury penthouse Jenny and Kyle had just rented with my money. They were dragged out of bed in their expensive silk pajamas, their sleepy faces turning to horror at the sight of the federal agent's badge. But the most satisfying moment wasn't the raid itself. It came 24 hours later at the emergency appeals court hearing. The courtroom fell into a deadly silence as the prosecutor played the video. On the big screen, Jenny's image appeared clear. She was standing in front of the basement door, holding the heavy padlock. "Just stay there, Mom." Her voice boomed from the speaker, cold and cruel. And then she giggled at Kyle. "Daddy will never know. We'll just say she's lost." From under the door, Margaret's faint cries echoed. "Jenny, I'm scared of the dark. Let me out." I saw the judge, a woman of steel, turn away to wipe away tears. Jenny sat in the dock, her face drained of blood, trembling like a dry leaf before a storm. When the handcuffs rang dryly, locking the hands of the daughter I had once cherished, I felt no joy. I just stood there, cold, empty. I did not smile. This was not victory. This was clearing the rubble. A month later, I sold the house. There were too many ghosts there. I used the remaining money to take Margaret to a small coastal town in Oregon where she had always dreamed of living when she grew old. Every afternoon we walked on the cold, wet sand. Margaret no longer remembered much of what had happened. Sometimes she did not even remember my name, but she no longer flinched when I touched her. She knew she was safe. I lost my home, I lost the daughter I loved more than life itself, I thought to myself as I held her wrinkled hand, listening to the sound of the waves. But I kept the most important thing, the promise I made to her before God 40 years ago, that I would protect her until my last breath, and this time there would be no doors that could lock us out.